Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs if he will make a statement on the imprisonments of the Catalan leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Arfon, on securing this urgent question. I appreciate it is a question which will drive passions amongst him and individually amongst other right honourable and honourable members of this House. But the government, Her Majesty's government's position on Catalonia is clear, and that is that it is a matter for Spain. The United Kingdom strongly supports the rule of law and remains clear that political leaders, like anyone else, have a duty to abide by the law. Questions related to the issue of Catalan independence should be resolved within the proper constitutional and legal channels. And questions related to the legal penalties handed down by the courts of Spain are a matter for Spain and its democratic institutions.
Williams. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer as far as it went. Many members of this House have been concerned by the cases brought before the Spanish Supreme Court against the 12 Catalan political and civic leaders on charges of sedition, embezzlement of public funds and disobedience in relation to the 2017 referendum on Catalan independence. I wish to make it entirely clear that my question today is about what happened yesterday and not on the question of independence, rightly or wrongly. 9 of those accused have already been held in preventive detention for nearly 2 years and have been visited by members of this House, members of the Scottish Parliament and by members of the Senedd of Wales. Yesterday they were sentenced. One of those sentenced is Carme Forcadell, the Speaker of the Catalan Parliament, whom you kindly welcomed to Speaker's House and to our chamber when she visited us shortly before her detention. Her offence, apparently, is to have allowed a parliamentary debate on independence. Yesterday, she was sentenced to 11.5 years in prison.
Come on, men. Come on, guys.
Mr. Speaker, as you confirmed in respect of a point I made some time ago, were you to allow a debate on Welsh independence, we would not expect your detention and prosecution for so doing. Others jailed include the former Vice President, Oriol Junqueras, who was given the harshest sentence of all of 13 years in prison. Mr. Speaker, bringing criminal charges is no way of resolving political differences. So, firstly, will the Government today join calls for the governments of Spain to engage in proper and respectful process of dialogue with the governments of Catalonia? And secondly, will the Secretary of State commit to pressing the relevant EU institutions to consider launching a procedure under Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union in respect of the Spanish state's response to the Catalan crisis that would include a consideration of the prosecution and sentencing of the Catalan political and civic leaders as an example, a clear example of how Spain is bringing about a risk of serious and persistent breach of the EU's founding values of respect for freedom, democracy, justice and human rights as outlined in Article 2 of that treaty. This is a matter for us and for the European Union and is not just a domestic Spanish matter. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said at the outset to my remarks, I appreciate that this is a matter which will drive passions, high passions, amongst our colleagues. I note that there are members of the Scottish Nationalist Party here in force. I welcome them back. I welcome them back from their conference. I'm sorry that they've had to sojourn for this urgent question. I hope that in the future we'll be able to find an accommodation to allow them to have their conference without interference from the activities in this chamber. As to the right to debate independence in Spain, I would make 2 points. First of all, the Spanish Constitution, which was agreed by Spain, including the people of Catalonia in 1978, makes it quite clear that without a change to the Constitution, it is not legally possible to hold a legal secessionist vote. I fully recognise the rights of those parliamentarians to make speeches, to debate, to make their points, and they've done that several times in the regional parliament of Catalonia, which they have every right to do. They also have the right to elections in that regional parliament. They had them in 2017, and the people of Catalonia made their choices. As to the legal rights of the parliamentarians that have been imprisoned, first of all, that is a matter, of course, for the Spanish courts, and we would not seek to interfere in those courts, just as I'm sure that members opposite would not seek the Spanish authorities to interfere in the proceedings of the Court of Session in Edinburgh. Those parliamentarians have a right to appeal to the Spanish Supreme Constitutional Court and indeed to the European Court of Human Rights. Let us see how the law takes its course.
Sir Desmond Swain.
It is a matter for Spain, but it's also shocking, horrifying, and a reminder of a former Spanish regime.
The Spanish courts are transparent, they are robust, they have handed down the penalties according to their law, and whether individual members of Parliament like them or not, that is the Spanish law. It is for the Spanish government to change it if the Spanish people wish it.
Emily Thornberry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and let me thank the member for Afron for securing it. Mr. Speaker, as a former lawyer, although I suppose some would say once a lawyer, always a lawyer, I'm always loath to criticise the courts, and I'm afraid, though, that what we saw yesterday was the judicial equivalent of what we saw from the Spanish police in the streets of Catalonia 2 years ago. Unnecessary, heavy-handed and entirely counterproductive. In an effort to crush the Catalan independence movement, these incredibly harsh sentences have simply given it fuel. And they will not just serve to radicalise what has hitherto been a peaceful pro-independence movement, but they will also drive many Catalans who were not previously part of that movement to join the cause. As one of the banners carried at yesterday's protest so pithily put it, I'm not pro-independence, but I'm not an idiot. And that same sentiment will be shared by many, not just in Catalonia, but across Spain, who see in these sentences a basic injustice being committed, which is unworthy of any nation, let alone a member of the European Union. But, Mr. Speaker, I believe that there is hope. And that hope is the approach that is being taken by the freshly elected socialist government in Spain, which this was a crisis they inherited, not one that they created. And even in these court cases, the state prosecutor urged leniency in sentencing. And I believe this is reflective of an approach that the socialist government has taken, in which we, their sister party, support. That the only way past this ongoing crisis is through peaceful dialogue and the eventual agreement of a political solution drawn up in accordance with the Spanish Constitution. Because if the answer instead is a further escalation of division and confrontation, the radicalisation of the pro-independence movement and more heavy-handed action by the Spanish police or the Spanish courts, then that is not an answer at all. And all the parties of goodwill must resist it. And my final point, Mr. Speaker, is this. I hear what the Minister of State says about this being a matter for Spain, but I wonder if he can perhaps help us with this. Given the sentences handed down by the Spanish courts and the ongoing threat that hangs over the former Catalan leader, Carlos Puigdemont, can the Minister of State confirm that the gentleman would be free to visit Britain, speak to supporters, universities, the media and politicians without any risk of being arrested for extradition to Spain?
To speak here? They could come and speak in the Palace of Westminster and would be extremely welcome. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and thank you for reminding us of our rights and the rights of our friends who may choose to come to speak to us in the Palace of Westminster. I'm obliged to the honourable lady for her comments, and also, I may say, for the reasonable tone in which she undertook them. Although I would note that this week she seems to be against the judges. A couple of weeks ago she was for the judges. I don't think you can be against the judges one week and for them the next. You need to be for the judges all the time. Mr. Speaker, well, I wouldn't wish to comment, Mr. Speaker, on the honourable lady's domestic circumstances. She can do that for herself from a sedentary, if not a supine, position. She mentioned the approach that Prime Minister Sanchez has taken. I would echo that. He has called for dialogue, for the use of carrot rather than stick, and I think it is incumbent on all of us as parliamentarians to encourage sober and reflective debate on what is an exceptionally passionate topic, not least in Spain and in Catalonia. With respect to Mr. Puigdemont, which I think was the substantive point that she made, and his right to travel here, any warrant, any European arrest warrant, is a matter for the issuing authority and for the independent agencies in this country, the police, the courts, the prosecuting authorities, and it is a convention that I don't propose to break here, Mr. Speaker, that we do not comment on any arrest warrant until or unless an execution of that warrant is made.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is my right honourable friend satisfied that due process seems to have been followed and those sentenced received a fair trial?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, welcome to the Chair. The legal framework of Spain is a matter for Spain. Their courts, as I said earlier, are open, they are transparent. Spain has a robust legal infrastructure that allows for right of appeal, and we support their infrastructure.
Peter Grant.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend my honourable friend from Afon for securing this urgent question. It's all very well for the Minister to hide behind the constitutionality of what has been done. Could I gently remind him that some of the most unspeakable acts of evil that Europe saw in the 20th century, some of the most unspeakable acts of evil that the United States and South Africa have seen, were constitutional and legal. Being constitutional does not make something either legally or morally defensible. Madam Deputy Speaker, many of these people are our equivalents. They are members of Parliament, they are government ministers, they are the Speaker of the Catalan Parliament, whose only offence was to seek to implement the mandate they had been given by their people in a free, fair and democratic election. The question is not whether we think Catalonia should or should not be independent. The question is whether we, as parliamentarians, are prepared to stand up and defend the right of parliamentarians across the world to say things that governments don't like, to implement the policies that their people have put them there to implement without fear of arrest and imprisonment. Any political system, any constitution that allows parliamentarians to be arrested for being parliamentarians is a constitution that is not fit for purpose and that needs urgent change. And in the case of the constitution of Spain and of Catalonia, the only legitimate way for that constitution to change is through the ballot box. So while it's not for us to decide the future of Catalonia, it's for nobody other than the people of Catalonia to decide that. I stand with the people of Catalonia, estic am Catalonia, and their right to determine their own future, and to do so in a free, fair and democratic process. Does the Secretary of State or does the Minister agree with me that the right of self-determination and the right to freedom of assembly are fundamental to the concept of modern human rights? Does he accept that sending armed police to break up peaceful demonstrations sets the wrong tone and is likely to inflame the situation rather than to encourage peaceful and legal dialogue? Will he even attempt to persuade the Government of Spain that the way to resolve this crisis is through the democratic political process and not through the criminal justice system. What conversations has he had with his Spanish counterpart and with his counterparts throughout the rest of the European Union to remind them that the founding principle of the European Union is that all peoples have the right of self-determination, and that any state which impinges on those rights through the use of force is a state that should not be supported by this or any other democratic parliament?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the question of whether the referendum in Catalonia was legal is quite clear. It was not legal. It was marked down by the Spanish courts. It was told that it was illegal. The MPs that decided to use public funds for that illegal referendum knew what they were doing. They knew that they should not have done it. They knew that they were breaking the law. And so, therefore, they must accept that the law will be done. In terms of the rights of people to assemble, in terms of the rights of people to protest, in terms of the way police action has occurred in Catalonia, I would encourage, as the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Islington South has said, I would encourage great care to be taken in the policing of those events. We in our own country know how very important it is to allow people to protest, to allow them to protest peaceably, and then to encourage them to disperse in a similar way. So I would certainly encourage our Spanish friends to do that. Have I had conversations with the Spanish government and with the Spanish authorities here? Yes, I have discussed diplomatically with the Spanish ambassador the likely outcome of the court action that we heard yesterday, and I shall be talking to him again, I'm sure, in the next weeks or months.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the regional elections that were held on the 21st of December provided a path to restoring the rule of law, and it is for all the people of Catalonia to have their say via democratic processes that are consistent with the Constitution as it stands presently?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is quite right. The elections in December 2017 gave to the people of Catalonia the right to exercise their democratic mandate. They did that. It created a regional parliament that has debated the questions before Catalonia, including the question of independence, and it has done that several times. It is through that mechanism, and the mechanism in the Cortes, if necessary, to amend the Spanish constitution to allow for such legal plebiscites to take place. It is a matter for that procedure and not a matter for illegal procedures, which of course only cause more harm than good.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister talks about acts that are lawful. We know many acts across history have been lawful. I'm thinking, of course, the response of the British state to the Easter Rising 103 years ago might have been lawful, but it could be best described as massively counterproductive act of repression. Could the Minister urge his Spanish counterparts to at least learn the lessons of history before further inflaming situations and encourage peaceful dialogue and reconciliation?
Well, I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the honourable member's question. I think that the Spanish government and Spanish parliamentarians of all stripes and colour will be exceptionally mindful of history. If anybody has read Anthony Beevor's The Battle for Spain and the terrible events that took place in Spain between 1936 and 1939, they will understand what can happen when disagreements get out of hand. And I'm sure that the Spanish government, the Spanish opposition and many people in Spain are very mindful of that.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Deputy Speaker, when the Minister gets to the box, he and I will discuss Ukraine fairly often. We will, more often than not, find ourselves in agreement. because we've chosen that what happens there is in our interests. If this was Yanukovych's government doing to people in Ukraine as it did back then in 2014, happening in Spain and in Catalonia now, he would rightly be at that dispatch box condemning it, and I would rightly be saying he was right to do so. Why doesn't he recognise his unique position as a minister in a unionist government that oversaw an independence referendum that was held legally and fairly, and he can inject some common sense into his Spanish counterparts?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, self-determination, as set out in international law, is a long-standing convention to which we subscribe, but the individual circumstances in individual states are often very different. He will know that the situation in Ukraine in 2013, 2014 is very different to the situation to which the people of Spain and Catalonia find themselves today, and we should treat each individual circumstance individually, and that is what we are doing here today.
Conor McGinn.
Deputy Speaker, as other honourable members have said, this is not about the merits or otherwise of independence for Catalonia. It is about the subjugation of political and civic leaders for pursuing a legitimate cause in a democratic and peaceful manner. That cannot be tolerated. It does not reflect well on Spain, a country I have great affection for, and frankly, if it was happening in some other parts of the world, the Minister's response would be far more robust than it is today.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand the passion which the honourable member brings to his position and his conviction in doing so. All I would simply repeat is that the law of Spain is clear, transparent and robust. Those people, equally passionately, who decided to pursue a secessionist agenda knew they were doing so breaking Spanish law. The consequences for them were clear. And though he may have his own individual viewpoint about those consequences, the position of the government is also clear. It is a matter for Spain.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the Minister, like others on the benches opposite, value highly freedom of speech. And of course, freedom of speech and freedom of expression are protected under the European Convention of Human Rights. So does the Minister agree with the International Commission of Jurists that these convictions for sedition represent a serious interference with freedom of expression, freedom of association and freedom of assembly, and that the resort to the law of sedition to restrict these important rights of freedom of expression is unnecessary, disproportionate and ultimately unjustifiable?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for bringing her legal knowledge to bear. What I would say is that that viewpoint is not necessarily the viewpoint of the Spanish courts. It may be the viewpoint of an international body, it may be her particular viewpoint, but not of international courts. It is for the defendants who have been found guilty by the Supreme Court to appeal, if they so wish, to the Spanish Constitutional Court, and beyond that to the ECHR. Let us see if they do so and how successful their cases may be.
Susan Ellen-Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the Minister has been remarkably weak in his responses, and I don't think that he has noticed that there has only been one person in this chamber that has made a question that is sympathetic to what he has said. Will he forget the whole debate about separatism, which is totally different, and speak reflecting the concerns of members across parties in this House, and tell the Spanish government and speak loudly for what we have said today?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure that the Spanish Embassy, the Spanish government, will have heard what individual members of this House have said. Individual members can make their views plain, and they have. But as far as it is a matter for Her Majesty's government, the government's position is plain. Spanish courts are independent, their processes are transparent and robust. The court penalties handed down are a matter for those courts, and any changes to Spanish law is a matter for Spain.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The Minister is at pains to justify the Spanish judicial process, which is interesting when we recall that it's only last month that the Supreme Court found his Prime Minister to have acted unlawfully. Now, does he propose that the Spanish rule of law is proportionate? And this is the question I'm asking. Proportionate. When Speaker Forcadell is imprisoned to a sentence of 11.5 years for permitting debate, does he believe that that is proportionate?
Yes. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom handed down its verdict last month, we made it plain that we would accept that verdict. We would obey the law. How can we then say that people in Spain should not obey the laws of Spain? Or why should we interfere or make comment upon the judicial processes or the penalties handed down by courts in a country which is democratic, which is robust, which is open? I don't think that we should, and I will not.
Gavin Newlands.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say, in the 4.5 years that I've been a member of this place, I've never been more ashamed of this so-called bashing of democracy following this weak response from the Minister. I stand in solidarity with all of the political prisoners because, being no doubt, that is what they are. I want to ask him about Jordi Cuixart, a civic leader, a non-politician who was arrested on trumped-up charges, convicted of these trumped-up charges, and now sentenced to 9 years imprisonment, nearly 2 years to a day since he was held on remand. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've met Jordi's wife and a young child, and during that meeting the toddler kept calling out for Dad. That child was 6 months old when he was remanded, but will be 11 when Jordi is released. What's the Minister's message for them? Because they deserve a lot better than these weasel words.
Well said.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, I am sorry, I am sad if a child is unable to reach out and touch his father, is not able to see his father. But the Honourable Gentleman says, in this particular case, that the charges are trumped up. Now, that's his particular viewpoint. The courts of Spain have decided otherwise. And if we are going to be a country that accepts and respects the rule of law, if we accept that Spain has a robust and transparent legal procedure, then we must accept the outcome of those court decisions, however much he or others may personally disagree with them.
Chris Evans.
The Minister says this is a matter for Spain. However, issuing the European arrest warrant for the President of Catalonia means other countries are now involved. Is he confident that this has not been issued merely for political purposes?
I'm confident about the robust processes of our own country, as I made clear before, and I think, as he heard, the issuing authority would be in Spain. It is for our independent agencies, the police, the courts, and our prosecuting authorities to decide the merits or otherwise of the warrant, and unless or until one is executed, we should not comment further.
David Linden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has said repeatedly that it would be inappropriate to comment on the activities of another country's judicial system, but some of us in these benches find that very difficult to believe, given that unnamed sources in his government were quite happy to criticise the Scottish courts last month. But there is a wider issue here, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the scenes that we saw last night with Spanish police acting with brutality against its own citizens, that's the kind of thing that if it happened in any other country outside the EU, the Minister would be on the phone in diplomatic channels, isn't it? Yep.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if we believed all the unsourced quotations in all of the newspapers that we read every day, then I think that we would be in a pretty pickle. What matters in this country, what matters in this House of Commons is what is said at this dispatch box. And it is the view of the British government that the processes of the Spanish courts are transparent, they are open, and they are robust. And it is incumbent on all of us as Democrats and as upholders of the rule of law to accept the outcome of those decisions, however much we may individually dislike or disagree with them.
Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And just to say, the imprisonment of legitimately elected parliamentarians does not fit with being a modern European democracy. So, on that basis, what discussion has the Minister had with Spanish Government over the past 24 hours regarding a mediated solution to the Catalan crisis? And will the Foreign Secretary take legal advice on pursuing a procedure under Article 7 of the EU Treaty as a matter of urgency?
I've had no discussions, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the Spanish Government in the last 24 hours, but I'm always happy to keep in touch with them. I've got a very good relationship with the Spanish Ambassador, and as events develop, perhaps I shall speak to him further.
Jamie Stone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a hell of a mess in Spain. It's likely to get worse. That's the fact of the matter. As the members in front of me know, I was on a different side when it came to the Scottish independence referendum. And yet, I think it is to the great credit of Scotland, and indeed colleagues in front of me, that we kept it civil, and we keep it civil today. I'm also mindful that in Northern Ireland, Senator Mitchell and General de Chastelain helped improve, let's put it that way, the peace situation in Northern Ireland. I wonder, is it worth the government considering forming together a party, perhaps of people from the independence movements of Scotland and Wales, and those of us who are on another side, to offer our services to Spain to try and de-escalate an extremely dangerous situation at this stage?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm obliged to the honourable gentleman for the tone which he has struck. It is a matter for parliamentarians and political parties to offer support or indeed disagreement to other political parties or countries on the continent. But it is not for the British government to interfere in the legal processes of Spain or the constitutional settlement of Spain. That is a matter for Spain and Spain alone.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Oppression everywhere has always got a long history of being legal. We know that, and that was a statement made by the member from Glenrothes earlier. And I would like to say to Catalans watching here today that, in fact, I was in a debate earlier with a Tory and a Labour politician with support for Catalonia, so it is cross-party. But the approach of the European Union has been spineless and shameless. Guy Verhofstadt, whose comments in China, Brazil and Turkey and almost anywhere else you can mention, but on Catalonia he's utterly silent. He plays Pontius Pilate, who can't get enough bowls of water to wash his hands with. And I'm afraid to say it's a position that seems to be shared by the UK government. Absolutely. The cry of action is the cry for more bowls of water with which to wash their hands. This in a chamber that's just spent an hour telling UEFA and FIFA what to do. There's no courage at all shown or telling the government in Madrid to behave with a modicum of decency. But I want to ask the Minister, what sort of oppression by Spain, in Barcelona, Catalonia, will the UK government tolerate? Forget the independence, forget Catalonia was annexed in 1716. What level of oppression do you oppose? Is it Hong Kong level oppression? Is it Barcelona level oppression? Or is it in jail for 14 years? What will you stand up and eventually oppose? Because the cowardice that is being shown is not on, and the people shouldn't be having to live with it.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman with whom I have the occasional drinking partnership, friendship, I think did himself a disservice in the way that he just comported himself. If the passionate situation in Catalonia and in its cities is to be de-escalated, if the situation is not to be further inflamed, I don't think that commentary like that, frankly, helps. I would call upon all those parties in Spain, all those that wish to protest, all of the agencies that are responsible for good governance and order in Spain, to treat of themselves and each other fairly and soberly, so that this particular problem, this great challenge, can be dealt with democratically and peaceably within the rule of the Spanish law.
Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am appalled by some of the words coming out of the Minister today. In Catalonia, people get hit, beaten, forcibly removed from places for simply standing up for their human rights. And this government refuses to condemn that. I find that inexcusable. Esta am Catalunya.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course the British government deplores any form of oppression, but it also deplores any form of riotous behaviour which undermines the rule of law and which threatens public property or public safety. I would encourage all sides to desist, to calm down and make sure that they address this question, which is a question for Spain, quietly and soberly and peaceably. And as far as any support goes, of course the British government supports that.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I had the incredible privilege of visiting Jordi Cuixart, Jordi Sanchez and Raul Romero in their prison cells, and they are intelligent, humble and proud men. Everything they have done was peaceful and appropriate. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." I refuse to be silent because this matters, where the UK government's silence has been deafening. The UK government likes to talk itself up as a force in the world. It thinks it sits at the top table with the big boys and girls. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Will the Minister here today defend democracy and denounce these prison terms?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I will defend and support the rule of law. I've no doubt that the gentlemen to whom he refers are humble. I've no doubt that they are articulate. I have no doubt that they can make powerful cases in their own defence and in the promulgation of the matters that concern them, and peaceably so. I've no doubt of that. But they must always act and operate within the law. And the Spanish legal system, as I have said and will say again, is open, it is robust, it is transparent, and it has handed down sentences which, whether we like them or not, we must accept. I make the further observation, if I may, that constitutionally Spain, of course, cannot have a secessionist plebiscite without a change to that constitution. That is in keeping with I think, the constitutions of France, the constitutions of Italy. They're all built in the same way, they're all meant to achieve the same ends, and we have to support them as long as they are in place.
Patricia Gibson.
Deputy Speaker, it's quite difficult to sit and listen to the Minister talking about the importance of observing the rule of law. I wait for him when he gets back on his feet to condemn the Leader of the House sitting beside him on the bench, who condemned the judges who found against the government's breach of the law during prorogation. Clearly the sentences which were passed down which were passed down in Madrid were an act of vengeance and not an act of justice. This is not about independence for Catalonia. This is about the fundamental principles of democracy. Does he not understand that all who believe in democracy have a duty to condemn the kind of repression we witnessed yesterday, and to say that it is a matter for Spain is a complete abdication of the UK's international responsibility, and to do nothing is a dereliction of duty, with all the shame that that will bring?
Well then, Madam Deputy Speaker, who is it a matter for? Is it a matter for this Parliament, this government, the European Union? Who? The Honourable Lady says that ministers in this government have criticised judges. She doesn't seem to appreciate the irony that she's doing exactly the same thing here and now about judges sitting and handing down sentences in Spain, a country which is democratic, a country which has a robust legal system, a country which adheres to the rule of law. That is all that we are doing in this House right now. We are supporting the rule of law and the right of the Spanish courts to hand down justice as they see it to be right.
Drew Henry.
Deputy Speaker, isn't it the case, Minister, that any country that seeks to perpetrate a human rights abuse will claim that their legal systems are robust and that is happening under the rule of law? What criteria does his government place on speaking out when free speech is challenged in this way?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of Catalonia have the right to freedom of expression. They have the right to do that through the ballot box in the regional parliament, which they have done. The Catalonian parliamentarians have the right to freedom of expression when they debate the question of independence, which they have done. So I don't really see why the honourable gentleman is making the argument that he is making. They have a right in the Spanish Parliament, in the Catalonian Parliament, to speak and to debate and to be heard. But they must do that within the rule of law, which the Spanish courts have decided they have not.
Hannah Bardell.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a young girl woman in my 20s, I visited Catalonia as part of a European Free Alliance youth delegation, where I met with and worked with many young Catalan activists and leaders who wanted one thing: to decide on their own future in a democratic and legal way. Now, whatever his matters are on the matter of independence for Catalonia, or indeed any other country around the world, surely he agrees with the right to self-determination and for citizens to decide the future path of their nation and people. He has an opportunity to redeem himself. Will he tell me, does he agree with that, and does he also agree that it cannot be right for any political differences to be solved by police brutality and incarceration?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I certainly agree that people have the right to self-determination, but they must do it within the law. In the case of Spain, that requires a change to the Spanish constitution, and it is for Spain to change its constitution, not for this Parliament or for the British government.
Brendan O'Hara.
Karen, I, along with many others, are absolutely dismayed at the complacency the Minister has shown at the jailing of elected politicians for up to 13 years for simply organising a referendum. If this had been a regime anywhere else in the world renowned for repressing democracy, the United Kingdom, quite rightly, would have been at the head of the queue in condemning that regime. Just because it is Spain doesn't make this any less wrong. No reasonable person could look at these sentences and say they were not excessive, punitive, disproportionate and vindictive. So if the Minister cannot bring himself to condemn legally, will he at least condemn these sentences morally?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm rather dismayed at the rather liberal way that the honourable gentleman casts aside the rule of law and due process. It is for individual members of Parliament to decide whether they agree or disagree with the sentences handed down by the Spanish courts. They may have a view on whether the defendants should appeal or should not appeal. But as far as the British government is concerned, this is a matter for Spain. It is a matter for the Spanish courts to hand down the laws of Spain, and it is a matter for the Spanish Parliament, as expressed through the Spanish people, to decide whether or not they wish to change the Spanish constitution.
Alison Hewlis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've worn yellow pretty consistently in this chamber over the past 2 years, not just because I like the colour, it's the colour of my party, but in solidarity with the people of Catalonia. And I ask him, how can he defend a regime that jails political opponents, cracks the heads of those who want to cast a democratic vote, and is running scared of the political symbolism of the colour yellow?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would, with all due respect, disagree with her characterisation of the government of Mr Sanchez as a regime. The government of Mr Sanchez has attempted dialogue with the Catalonian independence movements and parties. He has attempted to sensibly bring this question to a peaceful and equitable conclusion. He's also, of course, in the middle of an election to be decided on the 10th of November. So I don't agree with this categorisation of Spain as a regime. As I've said before, and I'm sorry if I have to repeat it, I shall say it again. These legal matters are matters for the Spanish courts. The constitutional settlement in Spain is a matter for the Spanish Parliament and ultimately for the Spanish people. Unless they wish to change their laws, nothing is going to change. But those changes are a matter for them and not for the British government.
And the prize for patience and perseverance goes to Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To be clear, the question before us today is not whether we support Catalan independence. It's not even whether an offence was committed under the Spanish Constitution. The question is, what do we think about the jail terms that were issued yesterday to elected politicians? Now, I know what I think. I think these are barbaric and outrageous, and I think they are diminishing how people perceive Spain in the world. I already know of several friends who were planning to visit Spain next year on holiday who are now making alternative arrangements. And the question to the Minister is not whether or not he wants to interfere in internal Spanish matters. The question is, what does he think about it? What does his government think about it? What relationship will change because of what has happened? And it is not good enough, Minister, to sit there and say nothing and do nothing.
Order is getting a little bit noisy, and we ought to hear the Minister's final answer. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman, with his usual pugnacity, asked the question, what do we think of Spanish judges and the sentences that they have handed down? I would gently say to him that if we start questioning what judges hand down, if we think that we can think better than them and interfere in their right to hand down justice as prescribed by their Parliament and as prescribed by their laws, then I think that we do set in train the sort of barbarity that he was criticising.
Thank you. We now order. We now come to the business